Electric cars like this don't belong in our neighborhood.
HOA President Veronica yells at sunrise, pointing straight at my Tesla in my own driveway. Tow truck driver.
Lady, this is his property, Zarzak.
Not anymore. Get this green junk out of here, now!
I'm standing there in my bathrobe, coffee spilling everywhere, watching them chain up my $120,000 Tesla like it's stolen goods. She smirks right at me.
Go ahead, call your eco-friends. Gas cars rule this place.
Veronica had no idea I'd been quietly preparing for this moment for months. She thought she could just bully anyone driving electric. But the very next day, I turned everything upside down. Her HOA's parking lots, suddenly under new rules she never saw coming. And the best part? It hit her right where it hurts, right in front of her own house. You won't believe how fast one Karen's empire crumbled. What would you do if someone towed your car just for being electric? My name's Ethan Blackwood, and 6 months ago, I made what everyone called a stupid decision. I left my 6-figure corporate job in Denver to move into my late grandfather's cabin in Pine Ridge Estates, a mountain community where morning air burns your nostrils with pine resin, but the neighbors will stab you with fake smiles. The cabin needed everything. 60 years of Colorado winters had beaten it senseless, but the bones were solid as grandfather's handshake. He was the original developer who built this place in 1987, turning abandoned mining land into affordable family housing. His workshop still smelled like sawdust and WD-40, tools hanging exactly where his calloused hands left them. That's where I found the development files that would change everything. Pine Ridge used to be real. 200 modest homes, gravel roads crunching under work boots, neighbors who knew each other's dogs by name. Then California tech money discovered us. Property values tripled faster than a Tesla hit 60. Original mining families got priced out, replaced by pretentious transplants like Veronica Steinberg. Veronica, 52, former Orange County real estate agent whose career imploded during the 2008 crash. She landed here broke and bitter, clawing her way to HOA president through 8 years of systematic intimidation. Now she drives a lifted Ford F350 with coal-powered and coexist bumper stickers, the irony apparently lost on her, parked diagonally across 2 spaces like she owns the place. Her first welcome gift? A note tucked under my Tesla's windshield wiper. Ostentatious displays of liberal politics unwelcome in family neighborhoods. The paper reeked of her signature perfume, some synthetic floral nightmare that could gag a buzzard. Week 2 brought architectural violations. My grandfather's rustic log cabin suddenly violated community harmony standards, rules mysteriously written the day after I moved in. The sound of her heels clicking on my driveway at dawn became my new alarm clock, clipboard in hand, measuring things that never needed measuring. Week 3 escalated to daily parking harassment, unauthorized vehicle charging violations, despite 0 actual rules about plugging into my own electrical outlet. The fines started small, $25, $50, but jumped to $200 daily when I ignored them. The certified mail carrier started waving at me like an old friend. Mrs. Henry, my 78-year-old neighbor, brought coffee one morning while I installed security cameras. Her weathered hands still smelled like the bread she'd been baking since 5 a.m. "Child, that woman's been circling this community like a vulture for 20 years, she said, offering cookies warm enough to steam in the mountain air. She drove out Maria Ramirez with fake noise complaints about her grandchildren playing, made the Kowalskis sell their grandfather's house because their vegetable garden was unauthorized commercial agriculture. I started documenting everything. 3 families destroyed in 5 years, all original residents, all longtime homeowners, all victims of manufactured violations that somehow only applied to people Veronica deemed undesirable. Not wealthy enough, not white enough, not conservative enough for her suburban fever dream. But digging through grandfather's papers revealed something beautiful. This woman had no idea what she was actually fighting. When Pine Ridge developed, parking spaces weren't just house accessories. They were individually deeded properties with separate legal protections. And buried in those original 1987 contracts was prophetic language about sustainable transportation infrastructure and alternative fuel vehicle accommodation. Grandpa wasn't just a developer. He was a mining engineer who understood energy transitions. The man literally wrote electric vehicle protections into property law 40 years before Tesla existed. Colorado state law prohibits HOA discrimination against clean energy vehicles. Federal regulations protect charging infrastructure rights. And Pine Ridge's founding development agreement, the document Princess Veronica obviously never bothered reading, included ironclad protections for alternative fuel vehicles and all supporting equipment. Every violation notice she wrote was evidence for my case. Every fine she imposed was building her legal grave. Every threatening letter was another federal discrimination charge waiting to happen. I wasn't planning some petty neighborhood revenge. I was preparing to dismantle her entire power structure. Because Veronica Steinberg was about to learn that sometimes, when you declare war on the quiet guy with the electric car, you're actually declaring war on the wrong family's 40-year legal legacy. 3 weeks of harassment was apparently just Veronica's warm-up act. The real show started on a Tuesday morning, when I woke up to diesel engines rumbling outside my bedroom window. What the hell? I stumbled to the window in my boxers, coffee-deprived and confused. There's my Tesla, hooked to a flatbed tow truck like some kind of criminal evidence. The morning air carried the stench of exhaust, mixed with Veronica's perfume, as she directed the operation from her driveway. "Ma'am, this seems like his private property," the tow truck driver said, scratching his head under a greasy baseball cap. "Commercial vehicles aren't permitted overnight parking," Veronica announced, clipboard clutched against her chest like armor. "That electric car contains business equipment, making it commercial under HOA regulations. Business equipment. My laptop bag and some electrical testing gear made my personal vehicle commercial. I remembered reading somewhere during my grandfather's research that most HOAs can't legally redefine personal vehicles as commercial just because you carry work stuff. Your laptop bag doesn't magically transform your car into a delivery truck. But try explaining legal nuance to someone wielding a clipboard like a medieval weapon. By the time I threw on clothes and ran outside, my Tesla was disappearing around the mountain bend, chains scraping asphalt like fingernails on a chalkboard. Veronica stood there smirking, her F350 idling behind her. Apparently personal trucks that burn premium unleaded don't count as commercial. "Towing fees $485, plus $89 per day storage," she called out sweetly. "Bulldog Towing on Highway 9. Cash only." Bulldog Towing, owned by Rick Steinberg, her brother-in-law, of course. The family business was apparently vehicular kidnapping. I had exactly 47 minutes to make a $50,000 presentation to the Copper Mountain Ski Resort Consortium about their renewable energy conversion. Instead, I was walking 6 miles in my work clothes through Colorado mountain roads, boots slipping on loose gravel, arriving at the tow yard looking like I'd hiked the Continental Divide in a business suit. Rick Steinberg was a carbon copy of his sister-in-law, same smug attitude, same disdain for anything that didn't burn fossil fuels. His office smelled like motor oil and stale cigarettes, decorated with calendars featuring women in bikinis draped over muscle cars. The floor was sticky with decades of spilled coffee and automotive fluids. "Maybe get yourself a real American car next time," he chuckled, counting my cash like he'd just won the lottery. "These fancy California toys don't belong in working neighborhoods." That night, fueled by rage and strong coffee, I dove back into my grandfather's files. Turns out, my parking space deed grants exclusive vehicle storage rights, regardless of vehicle type. HOA bylaws contain zero definition for commercial vehicle. And buried in one of grandfather's legal reference books, I found Colorado Statute 3833.3106.8, which specifically prohibits HOAs from restricting electric vehicle charging or storage. But Veronica wasn't done. 3 days later, she called an emergency board meeting to address my continued violations of community standards. The meeting notice gave exactly 72 hours warning, the legal minimum required by Colorado HOA law, which she'd clearly researched just enough to weaponize. I showed up with a folder full of research and my phone recording everything. The community center reeked of industrial carpet cleaner and nervous sweat as 5 board members, all Veronica allies, arranged themselves behind a folding table like a firing squad. "Mr. Blackwood's electric vehicle creates ongoing disturbances," Veronica began, reading from prepared notes. "We've received anonymous complaints about noise, electrical interference, and property value concerns. Anonymous complaints about a silent electric car creating noise. The woman was either delusional or banking on everyone else being idiots. "I'd like to hear these recordings of electrical interference," I said calmly, "since electric vehicles are literally silent." That's when she played her ace, a manila folder full of neighbor statements about my Tesla's disruptive presence. 6 pages of complaints, all written in the same handwriting, all dated the same day, all signed with different names I'd never heard of. The paper still smelled like printer ink. "Furthermore," Veronica continued, "unauthorized recording of HOA proceedings violates privacy expectations under community guidelines." Time for my own little surprise. I pulled out my phone and hit play. Veronica's voice, crystal clear from 3 days earlier, talking to Rick about getting rid of the tree hugger before his liberal politics spread to other residents. The room went silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Board member Janet Walsh actually winced, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. But Veronica's allies quickly closed ranks. The recording was invasion of privacy and inadmissible in community proceedings. By the end of the meeting, they'd voted to implement daily parking space inspections for community safety. Guess whose space got inspected every morning at 6 a.m., while Veronica's F350 continued parking wherever it pleased. The inspections became neighborhood entertainment. Veronica measuring tire distance from the curb with an actual ruler, while kids pressed their faces against windows, giggling. Her heels clicking on asphalt sounded like an angry woodpecker attacking metal siding. Mrs. Henry brought me coffee one morning as Veronica crouched beside my Tesla with a magnifying glass, hunting for microscopic oil stains. "Child, that woman's wound tighter than a tick on a dog's back," Mrs. Henry observed, offering homemade cinnamon rolls still warm from the oven. "But you keep documenting everything. In my experience, bullies always hang themselves with their own rope." I was counting on exactly that. Every ridiculous inspection, every manufactured violation, every abuse of power was building my case. Veronica thought she was tightening her grip on the community. She was actually tying her own noose. If Veronica thought daily parking inspections would break me, she underestimated how stubborn a guy can get when his family becomes collateral damage. But she wasn't done escalating. Apparently, harassing me wasn't satisfying enough anymore. She wanted to control who could visit me. The new rule appeared on community bulletin boards one Friday morning, posted with military precision. Overnight guest vehicle registration required for community safety. Sounds reasonable until you read the fine print, revealing Veronica's real target. Any alternative fuel vehicle required a special environmental impact assessment before overnight parking approval. My sister Emma discovered this the hard way. She drove up from Boulder that Saturday in her Prius hybrid, trunk loaded with power tools, to help install my new kitchen cabinets. We'd properly registered her as a guest, followed every bureaucratic hoop, even paid the ridiculous $25 processing fee. But Sunday morning at 5:47 a.m., I woke to the familiar symphony of diesel engines and scraping metal chains. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, watching Emma's car disappear behind that same bulldog towing flatbed. The mountain air was so cold it burned my lungs, and diesel exhaust hung over our driveway like a toxic funeral shroud. Emma stood in her pajamas, clutching her coffee mug with white knuckles. "Ethan, what the hell? I followed all their insane rules." Veronica emerged from her house fully dressed at 6 a.m. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, clipboard armed and ready. She'd obviously been waiting for this moment, like a spider watching her web. "Hybrid vehicles require additional environmental documentation beyond standard guest permits," she announced, with the authority of someone who'd never read an actual environmental regulation. "Environmental documentation," I repeated slowly, tasting each absurd word. "For a car that gets 50 miles per gallon and produces fewer emissions than your leaf blower. Community standards evolved to address emerging safety concerns," she replied, each syllable dripping with manufactured professionalism. "Emerging concerns? Right. The only thing emerging was her brother-in-law's bank account every time he fired up that tow truck." But here's where Veronica made her first serious mistake. While Emma dealt with Rick Steinberg's predictable smugness and another $485 extortion fee, I wasn't just getting angry, I was getting educated. See, Colorado's legislature had passed some very specific clean energy vehicle protections after years of exactly this discrimination. But more importantly, I'd started making calls to people who knew how to fight back. The Colorado Clean Energy Alliance was extremely interested in Pine Ridge's emerging concerns. Turns out, we weren't their first rodeo. Within 48 hours, I had something Veronica didn't expect: professional legal backing and a network of similarly harassed residents across the state. Monday brought Veronica's next escalation: a community-wide memo about alternative fuel vehicle safety concerns. She'd hired an electrical safety expert to speak at an emergency meeting about the dangers of electric vehicles. Professional letterhead, official-sounding language, the whole 9 yards. The expert turned out to be Rick's unemployed cousin Danny, whose electrical credentials apparently came from changing light bulbs and watching YouTube explosion compilations. His PowerPoint presentation featured screenshots from Fast and Furious movies, showing cars exploding, completely unrelated to actual electric vehicle technology. When Mrs. Henry politely asked him to explain the difference between AC and DC current, Danny's face went whiter than fresh snow. Sweat started beading on his forehead despite the community center's aggressive air conditioning. Well, they're both real dangerous when, mixed with water and stuff, he stammered, tugging at his collar like it was strangling him. Mrs. Henry's response cut through the room like a scalpel. Son, that man couldn't wire a ceiling fan without burning down the neighborhood. I've seen squirrels with better understanding of electricity. The room erupted in nervous laughter, but Veronica's damage was already spreading. Fear works faster than facts, and 3 homeowners with hybrid vehicles started parking off property rather than face harassment. But here's what Veronica didn't realize. Every ridiculous overreach was creating more evidence for the legal case building against Pine Ridge HOA. Every fake expert, every discriminatory rule, every abuse of power was being documented by residents who were getting tired of suburban tyranny. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of just defending myself, I was going on offense. I'd found something in grandfather's files that Veronica had no idea existed. Something that would expose exactly how little power she actually had. But I needed to let her dig her hole a little deeper first. Because the best way to defeat a bully isn't to outmuscle them. It's to let them destroy themselves while you gather evidence for the knockout punch. And Veronica Steinberg was about to hand me everything I needed to end her reign of terror permanently. Veronica's next move proved she'd officially lost her mind. If harassing guests wasn't generating enough chaos, she decided to declare war on my actual property. I woke up Tuesday morning to the bone-rattling growl of heavy machinery outside my bedroom window. Through frost-covered glass, I watched a crew in hard hats tearing up my front yard with a mini excavator, diesel smoke belching into the crisp mountain air like some kind of industrial funeral pyre. "What the hell are you doing to my property?" I yelled, jogging outside in my bathrobe, slippers crunching through snow and frozen dirt. The crew foreman, a weathered guy named Mike with calloused hands and honest eyes, looked genuinely confused. "Sorry, buddy. HOA hired us for emergency electrical remediation. Lady said there's unpermitted wiring endangering the whole neighborhood grid." Emergency electrical remediation. They were literally destroying my Tesla charging station with a backhoe. Veronica materialized like a perfectly coiffed demon, clipboard pressed against her chest, directing the systematic destruction of my legally installed electrical outlet. The morning air reeked of diesel fumes, mixed with her signature department store perfume, a combination that was starting to smell like pure, concentrated evil. "Unpermitted electrical installations create fire hazards and grid instability," she announced to the growing crowd of neighbors gathering on sidewalks like spectators at a car wreck. "Community safety requires immediate removal of dangerous infrastructure." Mike scratched his head under his hard hat, studying the torn-up wiring. "Ma'am, this looks like standard residential work. Clean installation, proper permits, everything up to code. HOA regulations supersede county permits," Veronica declared, with the unshakable confidence of someone who'd never actually read electrical code in her life. "All remediation must be performed by approved contractors to ensure community safety." Approved contractors. Right. I'd bet my left kidney the only approved electrical company was Steinberg Electrical Services, conveniently owned by Veronica's husband Dave. While Mike's crew reluctantly followed orders to destroy $3,200 worth of perfectly legal electrical work, I called the county inspector. Turns out, my charging station wasn't just properly permitted, it exceeded current safety standards by a significant margin, but the damage was done. Severed electrical lines snaked through my yard like dead mechanical serpents. My Tesla was now a very expensive lawn ornament, unless I wanted 60-mile round trips to the nearest supercharger. The emergency remediation estimate from Steinberg Electrical? $8,500. For work any legitimate electrician would charge $2,000 for. Dave's markup was apparently 425% above market rate. Not bad for a captive customer base held hostage by clipboard tyranny. But here's where Veronica's greed created the opening I'd been waiting for. The excavation had torn up more than just my property. It demolished Mrs. Henry's prize-winning rose garden along our shared boundary. 3 decades of carefully cultivated roses, destroyed by accident during the electrical emergency. Mrs. Henry stood among the destruction, tears cutting tracks down her weathered cheeks as she cradled broken stems. The roses still smelled sweet despite being torn from their roots, their petals scattered across frozen ground like confetti at a funeral. "Those were my Harold's favorites," she whispered, voice cracking like old paper. "He planted every single one before the cancer took him." That's when the pattern became crystal clear. This wasn't Mrs. Henry's first accidental property destruction during manufactured Steinberg emergencies. Tom Rakestraw's solar panels had been damaged during roof safety inspections. The Ramirez family's vegetable garden was destroyed by emergency drainage work just before they fled the community. This was systematic property terrorism, designed to force out original residents who couldn't afford constant emergency repairs at Steinberg family markup rates. That night, fueled by rage and strong coffee, I tore through grandfather's files with desperate intensity. The workshop smelled like motor oil and old paper, tools casting long shadows under the fluorescent light as I searched for something, anything, that could stop Veronica's reign of terror. Then I found it. Buried in the original 1987 development agreement, written in my grandfather's precise handwriting. Developer guarantees environmentally conscious community with perpetual alternative energy infrastructure support. Not suggestions, guarantees. Legally binding promises that transferred with property ownership when the HOA purchased the land. But the real bombshell was the penalty clause. Violation of environmental protections triggers immediate reversion of all parking facilities to individual homeowner ownership at original development prices. My hands actually shook as I did the math. 127 parking spaces, original 1987 price, $400 each. Current market value, $8,500 each. Total current value, $1,079,500. Buyback obligation, $50,800. Veronica's potential loss, over $1 million. Every electric vehicle ban, every charging station destruction, every alternative fuel discrimination was a violation triggering automatic parking space reversion. Grandfather hadn't just built affordable housing. He'd created a legal nuclear weapon designed to detonate if anyone discriminated against clean energy. I sat in that workshop at midnight, surrounded by dusty contracts and the ghost smell of my grandfather's coffee, finally understanding his genius. Veronica thought she was conquering Pine Ridge Estates. She was actually lighting the fuse on her own destruction. But I wasn't ready to trigger that explosion yet. Let her keep attacking. Every violation made the final blast bigger. The breakthrough that changed everything came at 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, sitting in grandfather's workshop with the taste of stale coffee coating my tongue and the musty smell of decades-old paper filling my lungs. I'd been methodically destroying my sleep schedule, going through every file, every contract, every scrap of legal documentation grandfather had saved. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across yellowed papers spread across his workbench, between scattered wrenches and wire strippers. That's when I found the manila envelope tucked behind a coffee-stained manual for a 1987 Chevy pickup. Grandfather's handwriting on the front. Pine Ridge, final contracts, keep safe. Inside were documents I'd never seen, not just development agreements, but the actual property transfer records from when grandfather sold community land to the newly formed HOA in 1994. My hands trembled as I unfolded contracts that smelled like old leather and forgotten promises. Then I saw it, a clause that made me drop my coffee mug, ceramic exploding across the concrete floor in a splash of caffeine and revelation. Perpetual clean energy easement attached to all Pine Ridge properties and facilities. I read the section 3 times before its implications hit me like a lightning strike. Grandfather hadn't just been a developer. He'd been a former mining engineer who understood energy transitions decades before anyone else. And he'd written legal protections for alternative fuel vehicles into every property deed in 1987, 37 years before this fight even started. The language was surgical in its precision. Any restriction, prohibition, or interference with clean energy vehicle access constitutes easement breach, triggering immediate facility ownership reversion to individual property holders at original purchase prices. My pulse hammered in my ears as I calculated the numbers. The HOA purchased all 127 parking spaces in 1994 for $400 each. Total investment, $50,800. Current market value due to Colorado's real estate explosion, $8,500 per space. Total current worth, $1,079,500. Veronica's systematic electric vehicle discrimination wasn't just harassment. It was breach of contract triggering automatic ownership transfer back to homeowners at 1994 prices. Her potential loss, $1,028,700. But the real bombshell was tucked into the easement's fine print. Homeowners who regained parking control could install whatever electrical infrastructure they wanted. Charging stations, solar arrays, energy storage systems, the works, all protected under grandfather's original environmental vision. The man had built a legal nuclear weapon designed to detonate if anyone tried to suppress clean energy progress, and he'd hidden it in plain sight for 30 years, waiting for someone stupid enough to trigger it. Then I found his handwritten note, paper soft as tissue from age. For my grandson, Ethan, you'll inherit not just property, but responsibility to protect what's right for future generations. The tools are here when you need them. The workshop went blurry as my eyes filled with tears that smelled like sawdust and motor oil. He'd known. Somehow he'd known I'd end up here, fighting this exact battle, needing this exact weapon to defend our family's vision of community progress. But the strategic beauty was breathtaking. I didn't need to stop Veronica's violations. I needed to encourage them while documenting everything. Each towing incident, each charging station destruction, each electric vehicle ban was another breach strengthening my legal case. Veronica thought she was conquering Pine Ridge through fear and intimidation. She was actually lighting the fuse on her own complete destruction while handing me the match. Harold Pinkerton, grandfather's original attorney, was still practicing environmental law in Denver at age 78. If anyone could confirm this easement interpretation, it would be the man who helped write it. I sat in that workshop until sunrise, surrounded by the ghost smell of grandfather's coffee and the weight of his 40-year plan finally clicking into place. The quiet kid with the electric car was about to trigger the legal earthquake that would reshape Pine Ridge forever, and Veronica Steinberg had no idea what was coming. Thursday morning found me sitting across from Harold Pinkerton in his downtown Denver office, where the smell of old leather law books mixed with decades of cigarette smoke, from back when lawyers could chain smoke their way through depositions. At 78, he still had the predatory eyes of a shark and a handshake that could crack walnuts. "Your grandfather was one magnificent bastard," he chuckled, studying the easement documents through reading glasses held together with electrical tape. He saw this environmental discrimination coming decades before Tesla was even a fever dream. The office walls showcased 40 years of David versus Goliath victories, framed newspaper headlines about coal companies defeated, oil pipelines stopped, communities protected from corporate bulldozers. This wasn't just any attorney. This was the guy who'd perfected using property law as an environmental weapon. "So the easement interpretation holds water?" I asked, trying not to sound like a kid on Christmas morning. "Holds water? Hell, it's waterproof," Pinkerton confirmed, tapping the contracts with a gnarled finger. Every violation that clipboard-wielding lunatic commits makes your case stronger. With discrimination this systematic, he whistled through his teeth. She's essentially building her own legal gallows. He explained easement law like he was teaching Environmental Protection 101. Think of property easements like mineral rights. They stick to the land forever, surviving ownership changes, rule modifications, even complete HOA restructuring. Once my grandfather embedded clean energy protections into Pine Ridge's foundation, no community association could override them without triggering the penalty clauses. The strategy evolved over strong coffee and precedent research. Instead of fighting Veronica's escalating violations, I'd document everything while secretly preparing mass parking ownership transfer paperwork. Let her dig deeper while I assembled the evidence to bury her authority permanently. Building the alliance required surgical precision. Mrs. Henry brought 40 years of community credibility, plus standing as a damaged party. Her destroyed rose garden was perfect evidence of Steinberg family overreach. Tom Rakestraw provided technical expertise as a licensed electrician who could testify about EV charging safety and legality. Janet Clearwater added medical perspective on air quality benefits from electric vehicle adoption. The documentation system I created would make forensic accountants weep with joy. Security cameras captured every parking violation with time-stamp precision. Spreadsheets tracked fines, towing incidents, and discriminatory rule changes cross-referenced with witness statements. I photographed all 127 parking spaces with deed numbers, current conditions, and evidence of HOA harassment. Total documented violations over 12 weeks, 47 incidents, each one a breach of the clean energy easement, each one strengthening the case for automatic ownership transfer. But the financial research revealed vulnerabilities I hadn't expected. HOA current debt, $340,000 for recent improvement projects that coincidentally benefited Steinberg family businesses. Monthly assessments barely covered operating expenses. Emergency assessment for parking buybacks would bankrupt most households or force complete HOA dissolution. Meanwhile, I researched community energy benefits that would follow parking ownership transfer. Colorado's right to charge legislation protected residential charging installations, something I'd learned during my grandfather's legal education. Federal tax incentives covered 30% of EV infrastructure costs. Community solar could slash electricity bills by 40% while supporting expanded charging networks. The math was beautiful. Pine Ridge residents spent roughly $890,000 annually on gasoline. Community electric transition could cut transportation fuel costs by 80% over 20 years, while improving property values and air quality. Hard to argue with numbers that compelling. Pinkerton helped prepare 3 potential confrontation outcomes. Option 1. Veronica acknowledges easement violations and agrees to respect clean energy rights. Option 2. Systematic discrimination triggers partial parking ownership transfer. Option 3. Continued violations force complete facility reversion to homeowners at 1994 prices. Frankly, Pinkerton said, organizing documents with surgical precision, given her narcissistic escalation pattern, I'd mortgage my house betting on option 3. People like this don't surrender. They have to be completely crushed. Community organizing happened through Mrs. Henry's church networks and Tom's contractor connections. No dramatic confrontations or inflammatory flyers, just neighbors sharing factual information about property rights and energy independence. We identified 34 potentially supportive households, 12 fence sitters needing more information, and 23 Veronica loyalists opposing any change. Ironically, Veronica's door-to-door fear campaign was helping me identify sympathetic residents. Her increasingly unhinged rhetoric about liberal environmental invasion was alienating moderate homeowners who wanted reasonable community management, not ideological warfare. Media preparation came through Janet's cousin at 9 News, hunting for local environmental stories. The angle was perfect. Small mountain community pioneering clean energy while fighting fossil fuel discrimination. Catnip for Colorado's environmentally conscious media market. The final masterstroke involved timing. I scheduled the legal revelation for maximum impact at the monthly community meeting, ensuring Veronica would have the largest possible audience when her authority imploded. She'd unknowingly created the perfect stage for her own public destruction. Everything was ready. Legal documents prepared, allies organized, evidence compiled, media contacted. 67-year-old suburban dictator with a clipboard versus quiet guy with an electric car and his grandfather's 40-year revenge plan. She had absolutely no idea what was coming. Veronica's desperation became obvious when she started making midnight house calls. I woke up Tuesday night to the sound of gravel crunching in my driveway at 11:47 p.m. Through the bedroom window, I watched her emerge from her F-350 like some kind of suburban vampire, clutching a manila envelope against her chest. The porch light cast harsh shadows across her face as she knocked with the urgency of someone whose world was crumbling. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said when I opened the door, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. The smell of wine on her breath mixed with her signature perfume created an aroma of desperation that could choke a horse. "It's almost midnight, Veronica. What could possibly—" "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she interrupted, stepping closer with the predatory smile of a car salesman sensing desperation. "The board realizes our enforcement may have been overly aggressive. We're prepared to resolve this situation amicably." Amicably. Translation? She'd discovered my legal research and was trying damage control. She opened the envelope, revealing a check written to me for $2,847, covering all my parking fines plus towing fees, with interest. "We'll also waive all future electric vehicle restrictions and pay your legal costs if you agree to drop any pending complaints." When I didn't immediately grab the check, her mask slipped slightly. "You've made your point about environmental rights. But dragging this into court benefits nobody. Property values could tank if this becomes public litigation." Property values. Her real concern wasn't community harmony. It was protecting the investment portfolios of her wealthy allies who'd colonized Pine Ridge over the past decade. "I'll think about it," I said, closing the door on her increasingly frantic protests about reasonable compromise and moving forward together. But Veronica wasn't just trying bribery. The next morning brought evidence she'd escalated to full-scale intimidation. Anonymous notes appeared on doors throughout the community. "Electric vehicle owners are driving down property values. Protect your investment. Support common-sense transportation standards." The paper smelled like the same printer toner used for HOA official notices, and the language matched Veronica's passive-aggressive communication style perfectly. Rick's towing trucks started patrolling Pine Ridge like mechanical vultures, driving slowly past every house with hybrid or electric vehicles. No actual violations occurred, but the message was clear. We're watching, we're ready, and we can strike any time. Mrs. Henry found tire tracks across her repaired rose garden Wednesday morning, along with a note suggesting elderly residents should consider senior communities with better safety protocols. The paper was unsigned, but the threat was unmistakable. Then came the smear campaign. Veronica created a neighborhood Facebook group called Pine Ridge Property Protection and filled it with posts about how outside environmental activists were trying to destroy American suburban values. She shared articles about electric vehicle fires, lithium battery explosions, and power grid instability, none relevant to actual EV safety, but perfect for generating fear among uninformed residents. The posts included photos of my Tesla, with commentary about ostentatious displays of wealth masquerading as environmental virtue. She'd apparently been documenting my daily activities for weeks, creating a portfolio of evidence that I was some kind of eco-terrorist threatening community stability. But her masterpiece was a petition demanding immediate removal of all alternative fuel vehicles, pending comprehensive safety review by qualified electrical engineers. She needed 60% of homeowner signatures to call an emergency vote banning electric vehicles entirely. The door-to-door campaign that followed was spectacular in its desperation. Veronica personally visited every household, armed with printouts about vehicle fires and electrical grid failures, presenting herself as the last defender of American automotive tradition against the invasion of radical environmental politics. I watched from my living room window as she spent 47 minutes at the Hendersons' front door, gesturing dramatically while Mrs. Henderson nodded politely and slowly backed toward her house. The same performance repeated at house after house, Veronica talking faster and louder while residents found excuses to end conversations quickly. What she didn't realize was that every desperate action was being documented. My security cameras captured the midnight bribery attempt. Mrs. Henry photographed the garden vandalism. Tom Rakestraw recorded the intimidating tow truck patrols. Janet collected screenshots of the social media harassment campaign. Each escalation provided more evidence of systematic discrimination and retaliation. Perfect ammunition for the legal case building toward inevitable confrontation. But the real beauty was watching her support erode in real time. Moderate residents who'd initially supported reasonable parking regulations were getting uncomfortable with midnight house calls and intimidation tactics. The petition drive that was supposed to demonstrate community support was actually exposing how isolated Veronica had become. By Friday, she'd collected exactly 23 signatures from the usual suspects, her core group of wealthy transplants who shared her vision of Pine Ridge as an exclusive enclave for people who drove the right kind of vehicles. She needed 120 signatures to trigger the emergency vote. With 5 days remaining before the monthly community meeting, she was 97 signatures short and running out of people willing to sign her increasingly unhinged petition. Desperation was making her sloppy, and sloppy opponents make the best legal targets. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for her to walk into it. By Saturday morning, Veronica had officially lost her mind. Her petition drive was failing spectacularly. Moderate residents were avoiding her like she carried the plague, and desperation was making her do increasingly stupid things that I documented with the enthusiasm of a nature photographer, tracking a rare species of self-destructing suburbanite. The weekend brought her nuclear option, character assassination through financial manipulation. I discovered her latest scheme Monday morning when my homeowner's insurance company called with concerns about high-risk vehicle storage creating liability exposure for other policyholders. Apparently, they'd received multiple complaints about my Tesla creating fire hazards that could spread to neighboring properties. The insurance rep sounded genuinely confused, reading from her computer screen. "Sir, according to our records, electric vehicles actually have lower fire risk than gasoline cars. But we've received formal written complaints claiming your vehicle violates community safety standards." Written complaints. From Veronica's husband Dave, whose electrical contracting license gave his professional opinion enough weight to trigger insurance review. The strategy was brilliant in its malice. If my insurance got canceled, I'd be unable to maintain a mortgage and forced to sell. But Dave Steinberg's professional assessment contained one fatal flaw. He claimed my Tesla charging created dangerous electrical loads exceeding residential safety standards. Problem was, Tesla charging draws less power than an electric clothes dryer, something any actual electrician would know instantly. I forwarded Dave's complaint to the State Electrical Licensing Board, with a note questioning whether someone this ignorant of basic electrical loads should be permitted to work on residential systems. Sometimes, the best defense is letting incompetent people destroy themselves. Tuesday brought escalation to full-scale community warfare. Veronica hired a private security company. Well, hired might be generous. The security consultant was Rick's unemployed brother wearing a polo shirt that barely contained his beer gut, driving around Pine Ridge in his rusted pickup truck with "security" magnets slapped on the doors. His job was allegedly monitoring parking compliance, but his actual function was intimidating residents who supported electric vehicles. He'd park outside houses with hybrids or EVs, taking photos and writing notes on a clipboard with the theatrical authority of someone who'd watched too many cop shows. Mrs. Henry handled him with devastating efficiency. When he parked outside her house Tuesday afternoon, she emerged with a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies and her most innocent grandmother smile. "Honey, you look like you need some proper food," she said, offering cookies still warm from the oven. "What kind of security work are you doing for our community?" Within 10 minutes, she'd extracted his entire life story, learned he was being paid in beer and gas money, and discovered Veronica had told him to document evidence of dangerous vehicle modifications and suspicious electrical activity. He left with a full belly, 5 extra cookies, and the uncomfortable realization that he was basically being paid to harass elderly widows. Wednesday's community Facebook group descended into complete chaos. Veronica's environmental fear-mongering had triggered a counter-response from residents who actually understood clean energy technology. Tom Rakestraw posted detailed explanations of EV safety systems. Janet shared medical studies about air quality improvements from electric vehicle adoption. Even some previously neutral residents started questioning why anyone would oppose cleaner, quieter transportation. The comment threads became battlegrounds between Veronica's shrinking faction of fossil fuel loyalists and a growing coalition of residents who'd researched the actual facts about electric vehicles. Her posts about grid instability got demolished by people who pointed out that Colorado's electrical grid was specifically designed to handle EV charging loads. But Veronica's desperation reached peak absurdity Thursday when she attempted to organize a community safety patrol to protect property values from environmental extremism. The patrol consisted of herself, Rick, Dave, 2 other Steinberg family members, and exactly 1 neighbor who apparently owed them money. Their first patrol lasted 17 minutes before Mrs. Henderson called the sheriff to report suspicious individuals documenting private property without permission. The deputy who responded knew most of the patrol members personally and suggested they find more constructive ways to spend their time. By Friday, Veronica's petition had stalled at 31 signatures, still 89 short of the 120 needed to trigger an emergency vote. Her door-to-door campaign had devolved into increasingly frantic monologues about American automotive heritage and foreign electric vehicle conspiracies that left most residents backing away slowly. The beautiful irony was that her escalating desperation was actually building support for my position. Residents who'd been neutral about electric vehicles were getting uncomfortable with midnight house calls, intimidation tactics, and private security theater. Her behavior was so extreme that even people who didn't care about environmental issues started viewing electric vehicles as the reasonable choice compared to whatever madness Veronica represented. Saturday night, I sat in grandfather's workshop, organizing evidence for the Monday community meeting. 43 documented harassment incidents, systematic discrimination against clean energy vehicles, attempted bribery, intimidation, insurance fraud, and unlicensed security operations. Veronica had built the perfect legal case against herself while destroying her own community support. All I had to do was present the evidence and trigger the easement clause that would end her reign of terror permanently. The quiet kid with the electric car was about to detonate the legal bomb his grandfather had planted 40 years ago, and Veronica Steinberg was standing directly on top of it. Monday night's community meeting packed Pine Ridge's community center beyond fire code capacity. 153 residents crammed into folding chairs designed for maybe 80 people. The overflow crowd lining walls and spilling into hallways. The air conditioning wheezed against body heat and nervous energy, while camera crews from 9 News and Denver Post set up equipment near the back exit. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with industrial carpet cleaner and anticipation, thick enough to cut with a knife. Veronica gabbled the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m., her usually perfect hair showing stress-induced fraying around the edges. She dressed for battle in her most authoritative business suit, but the clipboard trembling in her hands betrayed the panic behind her forced confidence. Tonight's emergency session addresses ongoing violations of community standards by residents who refuse to respect established vehicle regulations, she announced, voice pitched higher than usual. We'll vote immediately on permanent alternative fuel vehicle restrictions to protect property values and community safety. That's when Mrs. Henry stood up, her voice cutting through the room like a surgical scalpel. Point of order, Madam President. This agenda violates our own bylaws regarding discussion periods and public comment. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Veronica's face flushed red as she realized Mrs. Henry, sweet, cookie-baking Mrs. Henry, had actually read the HOA governing documents. Parliamentary procedure isn't, Veronica started. Furthermore, Harold Pinkerton interrupted, rising from the back row with the authority of 40 years practicing law. I represent affected property owners and request recognition under Colorado HOA transparency statutes. Outside attorneys aren't permitted at community meetings, Veronica declared, panic making her voice crack. That's when I stood up, folder in hand, speaking calmly into the electric tension. Mr. Pinkerton isn't an outside attorney. He's representing me as a property owner. And I'm not an outside agitator trying to destroy Pine Ridge. I paused, letting silence build while camera phones focused and news cameras rolled. My grandfather built this community, And tonight, you're going to learn what he built into its foundation. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Half the audience turned to neighbors asking, "His grandfather built this place?" While Veronica's supporters looked genuinely shocked. I opened the folder containing 40 years of legal preparation. In 1987, my grandfather embedded a perpetual clean energy easement into every property deed in Pine Ridge Estates. Every parking space, every driveway, every piece of infrastructure includes ironclad protections for alternative fuel vehicles and supporting equipment. Harold stepped forward, documents in hand. Every electric vehicle ban, every charging station destruction, every towing incident based on fuel type constitutes breach of easement terms, triggering immediate facility ownership reversion. "Those documents are forgeries," Veronica shrieked, abandoning all pretense of parliamentary dignity. "This is a coordinated attack by environmental extremists trying to destroy American suburban values." That's when I hit play on my phone, connected to the community center's sound system. Veronica's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "We need to get rid of the tree hugger before his liberal politics spread to other residents." 3 minutes of recorded evidence demolished any claim of neutral enforcement, coordination with Rick's towing company, targeting electric vehicles specifically, planning systematic harassment of environmental troublemakers. The room went deadly silent, except for fluorescent lights humming overhead and news cameras quietly recording Veronica's public meltdown. Harold's response carried 4 decades of courtroom authority. Easement violations trigger automatic parking facility ownership transfer to individual residents at original 1987 purchase prices. The HOA purchased 127 spaces for $400 each. Current market value exceeds $8,500 per space. I let the math sink in. Your total loss, over $1 million. But here's where I played my final card. However, Colorado law allows immediate individual purchase of violated easement properties. As of this morning, I've filed paperwork to purchase all 127 parking spaces directly from the HOA at mandated reversion prices. The room exploded. Veronica's face went white as she realized what I'd done. "That's right," I continued over the chaos. "Every space you've used to harass electric vehicle owners, I now control. And the first thing I'm doing is converting them all to electric vehicle-only parking with mandatory charging stations." "This is fraud," Veronica screamed, but her voice was lost in the rising chaos of 150 residents suddenly understanding the complete reversal of power. "Motion to approve Mr. Blackwood's parking space acquisition under easement violation terms," Mrs. Henry called out. "Seconded," came from 12 voices simultaneously. The vote was devastating. 142 in favor, 11 against. Motion to rescind all electric vehicle bans. 139 in favor, 14 against. Motion for Veronica's immediate resignation. 147 in favor, 6 against. But the real mic drop moment came when I addressed the community directly. "I don't want to own everyone's parking. Tomorrow morning, I'm offering to sell each space back to individual homeowners for exactly what I paid. $400 each. You'll own your own parking spot, control your own charging decisions, and never again face harassment for your vehicle choices." Veronica stormed out screaming about communist takeover, while Rick's towing truck waited outside. Ultimate irony as they fled together into the Colorado night. The quiet kid with the electric car had just purchased an entire community's parking infrastructure and was giving it back to the people who lived there. Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I stood in the Pine Ridge Community Center with 127 individual parking space deeds spread across folding tables, a notary public, and a line of residents that stretched around the building. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with excitement as neighbors who'd been powerless under HOA tyranny for years finally had the chance to own their parking spots outright. Mrs. Henry was first in line, $400 cash in hand, practically bouncing with excitement. 68 years I've been fighting for property rights, she said, signing her deed with a flourish. Never thought I'd live to see the day when a young man with an electric car would hand them back to us. By noon, 89 households had purchased their spaces. By 5 p.m., 127 deeds had new owners. Total revenue, $50,800, exactly what I'd paid the HOA. Total profit, $0, and the most satisfying day of my life. But the real transformation started immediately. Without HOA parking control, residents began installing whatever charging infrastructure they wanted. Tom Rakestraw's electrical business exploded with work as families upgraded to electric vehicles, knowing they'd never face harassment again. Within 6 months, Pine Ridge had more EV charging stations per capita than downtown Denver. The economic ripple effects exceeded my wildest projections. Property values increased 23% as Pine Ridge became known as Colorado's most environmentally progressive community. Young families moved here specifically for clean energy access and reasonable neighbors. The waiting list for homes hit 47 families by Christmas. Veronica's exodus became neighborhood legend. She sold her house in 3 weeks to the first family with a Tesla and 2 Priuses, cosmic justice at its finest. Her Florida retirement community specifically advertised no HOA restrictions in their marketing materials, apparently having learned about Pine Ridge through social media infamy. Rick's Towing faced a Department of Transportation investigation for predatory practices and lost their commercial license within 8 months. Dave Steinberg's electrical company folded after the state licensing board discovered he'd been charging 400% markups for basic installations while providing substandard work. But the personal victories were even sweeter. Mrs. Henry became Colorado's oldest certified solar installation coordinator at 79, using her newfound expertise to help other communities escape HOA environmental discrimination. She started teaching workshops called Grandmothers for Green Energy that drew standing room-only crowds across the Front Range. My consulting business expanded nationally as communities facing similar discrimination reached out for help. Turns out, Pine Ridge wasn't unique. HOAs across America were using vehicle restrictions to control and harass residents who made environmentally conscious choices. We developed a toolkit for fighting back that's been used successfully in 23 states. The Colorado legislature cited Pine Ridge when passing the nation's strongest anti-discrimination protections for clean energy vehicle owners. No HOA in Colorado can now restrict electric vehicles, charging equipment, or solar installations without facing automatic loss of parking facility control. The Blackwood Clause that protects future generations from clipboard dictators. Janet Clearwater and I got engaged 6 months after the meeting, bonding over shared experience fighting suburban tyranny. Our wedding reception was held in the community center where we defeated Veronica, with Mrs. Henry providing homemade cake and Tom Rakestraw installing special lighting powered entirely by solar panels. The annual Energy Independence Festival draws over 4,000 visitors celebrating Pine Ridge as a model for grassroots environmental activism. My grandfather's original community vision is featured in a museum exhibit that inspires other developers to embed clean energy protections in their projects from day one. Educational impact spread globally through Harvard Business School case studies and YouTube videos that went viral. How one Tesla owner bought an entire community's parking has 2.3 million views and spawned dozens of similar success stories where residents used property law to defend environmental rights. But the most meaningful outcome was proving that environmental progress doesn't require choosing between community harmony and clean energy advancement. It requires standing up to bullies while building bridges with neighbors who share values of responsibility and progress toward a cleaner future. Today, Pine Ridge generates 78% of its electricity from community solar installations. 53 households drive electric or hybrid vehicles. Air quality improved 34% from our fossil fuel dependency days, benefiting elderly residents with respiratory conditions while reducing everyone's transportation costs by an average of $3,400 annually. We created something unprecedented. An American suburb that chose environmental responsibility over fear, cooperation over control, and community ownership over authoritarian rule.